This video issues a warning to Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, Home Minister Amit Shah, Ambani, Adani, and other murderers that we intend to fight back to prevent you from destroying us. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. I am delivering this message to common people in the world to judge how Indian leaders who are pursuing a course of destroying us should be dealt with. The path that Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi, Home Minister Amit Shah, the richest Indians Mukesh Ambani and Gautam Adani, their Gujarati friends, Rajputs from the state of Rajasthan in India, and other murderers of people of British descent in India, and Sikhs in the South Indians and Sikhs, the murderers in the South Indian states have chosen is to control and loot India's economy and the country's banks and thereby impoverish the rest of the country. The purpose of looting the country and impoverishing everyone else is to evoke a violent reaction or response which will give them a pretext to wage war against the north, particularly Punjabis living in Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, Delhi, Uttarakhand, and Uttar Pradesh states. They have all the armaments manufacturing facilities and control all the country's nuclear and missile arsenal. Their ultimate goal is to destroy North India and exterminate or enslave the Punjabis, particularly Sikhs. I've described all their past and present attempts to do so in alliance with the Germans and German masqueraders and Chinese in my December 29, 2020 video titled North India's Declaration of Independence from the Rest of India. Let's first be very clear that all the people in the highest positions of the central government and various state governments in India are in power because of the help of the German masqueraders after having met the German hurdle qualification of murdering a person of British descent or an American or a Sikh because they fought the Germans during world wars. Because of that reason, they are closely knit and are kept on a leash by the Germans and their alliance partner leaders in India, the Rajputs, Gujaratis, Bengalis, and South Indians, with the Rajputs and Gujaratis being at the top of the hierarchy. This bunch includes the top Indian industrialists and businessmen. Next, let's look at the kind of actions Modi and his cronies and Indian allies are taking to seriously hurt the interests of the Punjabis and other North Indians. First is the government's control of law enforcement and the justice system. The police and law enforcement agencies and the courts are supposed to be independent institutions investigating violations of the law, arresting people for violations, and bringing them to justice by prosecuting them. The key Indian investigative and law enforcement agencies of the central government, totally controlled by Modi, include Central Bureau of Investigation, National Investigation Agency, Narcotics Control Bureau, the Delhi Police. It is under the control of the central government. The Bureau of Police Research and Development, Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, which is the apex agency for customs and smuggling activities, which allows Modi's cronies to get away with importing anything they want without paying the required duties in full. Then the National Crime Records Bureau, often used by the Modi government to make records vanish to quash investigations. Then the Rapid Action Force, which is a specialized wing of the Central Reserve Police Force of India, to deal with riot and crowd control situations. In reality, it is used to arrest enemies and allow free rein to their own party operatives to beat up and even murder opponents. Then Enforcement Directorate, the primary objective of which is the enforcement of two key acts of the Government of India, which are the Foreign Exchange Management Act and the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. This is the directorate that has permitted the huge hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of money scams, mainly by Gujaratis. Then Directorate General of Income Tax Investigation, responsible for investigating violations of India's tax laws, including fraud, evasion, and money laundering, which in reality never investigates well-connected individuals and their businesses. Any of its officers bold enough to exercise their powers simply vanish. Corps of military police and various state police departments are the other agencies. The state police departments do the bidding of the state governments. Therefore, wherever the state has a BJP, which is Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, or a BJP alliance government, justice is being perverted. Now, under the Modi government, all these agencies function for the benefit of its cronies and their other Indian alliance partners. The powers of all these agencies are abused to arrest enemies of the regime and keep them incarcerated for months and even years to destroy opposition. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, people have been arrested and incarcerated for long periods of minor infractions of the restrictions, whereas the BJP operatives, including Modi, can hold political rallies with hundreds of thousands in attendance or attend social functions with thousands in attendance without hindrance. In the process of selectively applying the laws, many crimes, including thousands of murders, have been committed by the Modi regime. The common man should judge what justice demands for these crimes. Besides the abuse perpetrated by investigative and law enforcement agencies, the Indian courts, including the Supreme Court of India, are totally subservient to the Modi regime. A judge is appointed as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who is totally compliant with the wishes of the government. Miscarriage of justice by even the Supreme Court of India is now the norm. In a November 2020 famous case, in a rare hearing that violated all norms, 8 days after his arrest, while on a holiday recess, India's Supreme Court granted bail to TV presenter Arnab Goswami, who is virtually a mouthpiece for the Modi government. He had been arrested for abetment to suicide in 2018. While Goswami was granted interim bail in an unseemly, hurried hearing at midnight, the same urgency has not been shown by the court in the cases of other jailed journalists. In the Goswami case, the Supreme Court elected to hear the case while on a holiday recess when the High Court had already directed that the case be heard by a lower court under normal procedures. There was no grave matter in Goswami's case except that he was a Republic TV owner and anchor who blatantly pandered to Modi government's agenda. Consider the case of Kerala journalist Siddiq Kappan, in contrast, who had gone to the state of Uttar Pradesh to report on the gang rape of a Dalit, which is the lowest caste, Dalit girl in Hathras city. During the incident, her spinal cord was injured. She was taken to a hospital where she died 2 weeks later. The police cremated her body at 2:30 a.m. without the knowledge or consent of the family in order to impede the investigation and legal proceedings against the accused. Kappan was arrested on October 5, 2020 and charged with breach of peace, but additional charges of sedition and other offenses under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and Information Technology Act were made. He has been incarcerated ever since, except for a release of 5 days to see his gravely ill mother, who subsequently passed away. He was denied a bail hearing by the Supreme Court just before Goswami was granted bail speedily. Kappan is a Muslim, and the Modi government and his political party, the BJP, have especially targeted Muslims all over India for malicious prosecution. In addition, anyone who investigates any actions of the government that may cause embarrassment immediately becomes a target. Kappan's case will likely drag on for years and possibly decades. There is a possibility he may even die in jail. Now, according to reporting by Outlook India, Kappan has been severely mistreated in Mathura district jail, which houses 1,700 prisoners against a capacity of 554. He has a weak constitution and was unable to eat prison food, barely surviving on cucumbers and yogurt. He even collapsed in prison once and injured his chin. In April 2021, he contracted COVID-19 like many of his fellow prisoners. After some delay, he was hospitalized. In hospital, he was kept chained to his cot for 4 days, not allowed to move and not allowed to use a toilet. He was discharged from the hospital, still sick with COVID 19, and thrown back to the overcrowded jail. A judge of the Mathura court has denied him bail, supposedly because of his links to a terror organization which is not banned, despite the fact that Kapan has been a journalist for 9 years and there is no evidence that he has ever affiliated with a terror organization. The Kerala Union of Working Journalists has been fighting for Siddiq Kapan's release since October 2020. The International Press Institute, an international network that aims to protect press freedom, has demanded his release from jail and that all charges against him be dropped, and has condemned his unacceptable ill treatment. India's justice system now has two tracks: those who pander to the Modi regime and all those who are in alliance with the Germans and obtain their possessions by murder are by and large not prosecuted or not convicted, no matter what crimes they commit. Those who criticize, oppose, or not support the regime can be falsely accused, incarcerated for long periods of time, denied justice, and receive the harshest possible punishment if convicted of crimes. Common people should judge how the leader perpetrators of such criminal behavior should be dealt with. According to the e-print in .in article, here are the organizations to which Modi has appointed men and women of the Gujarat, that is his home state, Gujarat cadre, as heads. Comptroller and Auditor General, which is a government auditor that ensures that government funds are being used efficiently and for the intended purposes, G.C. Murmu. Central Electricity Regulation Commission. Remember, Adani and Ambani are investing heavily in the energy sector, so P.K. Pujari is the head. Food Safety Standards Authority of India. Both Adani and Ambani are investing heavily in the food sector. Rita Tiotia is the head. Prime Minister's Office, P.K. Mishra is the head. Prime Minister's Personal Secretary, Hardik Shah, a Gujarati. Appointments Committee of the Cabinet, the body that makes decision on all top appointments in the central government. P.K. Modi is the chairman of the committee and Home Minister Amit Shah is a member. Border Security Force and Narcotics Control Board. Rakesh Asthana is the Director General. National Investigation Agency, Y.C. Modi. Central Board of Direct Taxation, P.C. Modi. Jal Shakti Ministry, or the Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation, headed by Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, a Rajput. He is the cabinet minister. Thus, much of the central government, over 1.3 billion people, is run by people mainly from a state that is Gujarat state, with a population of 64 million people, or people who have served in that Gujarat state cadre, or 4.6% of the total population, the purpose of which is to siphon off as much of the wealth of the country as possible to Gujarat state and concentrate in the hands of Modi's Gujarati cronies, Mukesh Ambani, Anil Ambani, and Gautam Adani, among others. Second, the control is control of India's economy and its financial system. Modi has sought to control every regulatory body dealing with the economy and finance. His appointments to the top positions have followed a pattern. His first choice is to appoint Gujaratis from his home state of Gujarat. Next choice is to appoint people he has known and worked with in his home state in the Indian Administrative Service cadre, or other services and state administrative services, when he was its chief minister from 2001 to 2014. He became Prime Minister of India in May 2014. His third choice is to appoint persons from the states which are part of the Grand German-Indian Alliance. They are experts at corruption and bribing. The reason for appointing persons from these states is that they are totally controlled by the Germans by virtue of their alliance. You will see that the holders of top positions in key regulatory bodies follow this pattern almost without any exception. So the key regulatory bodies are the Reserve Bank of India. The chief purpose of RBI is to conduct the monetary policy and regulate and supervise the financial sector. mainly the commercial banks and the non-banking financial companies. RBI governors since Modi came to power have been Raghuram Rajan from Tamil Nadu, Urjit Patel from Gujarat, and Shakti Kanta Das from Odisha, a state sandwiched between Bengal and Andhra Pradesh, which usually is allied with the Modi government. The non-performing loan ratio for the banking sector in India has been 3.23% in 2013, 3.82 in 14, 4.27 in 2015, 7.48 in 16, 9.32 in 17, 11.18 in 18, 9.08 in 19, and 8.21 in 2020. Thus, the NPL ratio continued to deteriorate from the time of Rajan to the time of Patel. It has improved from the time of Das, but only slightly. It is still high. It is expected to deteriorate in 2021 and 2022. This shows that the looting of Indian banks by Modi cronies and their alliance partners continues unabated. The men in charge of the RBI have been appointed to facilitate the looting of India's banks. Other regulatory body is the Securities and Exchange Board of India. Its purpose is to prevent malpractices in the capital markets, to protect the interest of investors, ensure proper and fair functioning of the markets in order to boost people's confidence. In a January 2021, Bloomberg article by Andy Mukherjee describes the state of the Indian capital markets. For years now, faith in the integrity of India's markets has hemorrhaged, with everyone from rating firms to auditors, fund managers, and trustees putting their own commercial interests above and often against those of the investing public. SEBI's lapses include collapse of the Yes Bank and closure of Temple funds. Then the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, regulator of telecom services and tariffs in India, was established on 20 February 1997 by an Act of Parliament to regulate telecom services and tariffs in India. Current chairman of TRAI is Dr. P.D. Vaghela, an IAS officer of the Gujarat state. TRAI is the regulator that changed or bent rules as needed to allow Jio, a subsidiary of Mukesh Ambani's Reliance Industries Limited, to become a telecom market leader in a few years. The company was allowed to offer full-fledged services in the guise of tests which bypass regulations. Jio was also excluded from scrutiny by changing the definition of significant market power. Thus, the Modi government is allowing his cronies Mukesh and Anil Ambani and Gautam Adani to create monopolies by putting men in charge of regulatory bodies who would bend the rules to benefit them. Then the Competition Commission of India regulates business competition in India. Its purpose is to promote competition and prevent activities that would impede competition. It is headed by Ashok Kumar Gupta of Bania, Dr. Sangeeta Verma, and Bhagwant Singh Bishnoi. Thus, Modi's allies have a majority in the members of the commission. CCI has been used to muzzle competition against Modi's cronies. For example, in May 2017, CCI ordered a probe into the functioning of the Cellular Operators Association in India following a complaint filed by Reliance Jio against the cartelization by its rival Bharti Airtel, Vodafone India, and Idea Cellular, while TRAI bent rules to help Reliance Jio to gain major market share quickly. In May 2019, the Commission launched an antitrust probe against Google to muzzle Google so that Jio has the time to develop its competitive products and enable it to become a near monopoly. Then the Airport Authority of India, responsible for creating, upgrading, maintaining, and managing civil aviation infrastructure both on the ground and airspace in the country. It provides communication, navigation, surveillance, or air traffic management services. It currently manages 137 airports, including 23 international airports and 81 domestic airports. Most of the board members of AAI are South Indians. In February 2019, AAI announced that the corporate group led by Gautam Adani had made the winning bids to operate and develop the airports in six major Indian cities, four of them state capitals. The cities are Ahmedabad, capital of Gujarat; Jaipur, capital of Rajasthan; Trivandrum, capital of Kerala; Lucknow, capital of Uttar Pradesh; Mangalore, and Guwahati. These airports were among the highest revenue earners and profit generators among all India's airports. The Adani Group had no previous experience in running airports. Most government norms and procedures for bidding for these contracts were violated. This has been characterized as crony capitalism at its worst. This is just a sample of the key central government agencies over which Modi's men have a tight control, giving them the ability to flaunt most rules as needed, quash and investigation and prosecutions of violations of the law, and siphon off the country's wealth and hand it over to his cronies from Gujarat, his home state. For example, Ambani has a significant and increasing share of the petroleum products market. That's why petroleum prices have skyrocketed during Modi's rule. Then the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers' Welfare, responsible for setting and administering the laws, rules, and regulations related to agriculture, food processing, and cooperation. The ministry is headed by Narendra Singh Tomar, a Rajput, and the bureaucracy is headed by Baniyas. Agriculture and related industries employ more than 50% of India's population. In 2020, the Government of India passed three farm bills designed to take away control of the agricultural sector from the state governments and concentrate it in the hands of the private firms headed by Mukesh Ambani and Gautam Adani. The purpose is to take over the work of the National Grain Procurement Agency, the Food Corporation of India, and give it to them so that they can squeeze the farmers by setting procurement prices, reject the agricultural output at will for being substandard, and delay payments. The farmers will then incur debts and will be forced to sell their land to them to pay off their debt, which will be written into the procurement contracts. Ambani and Adani can then consolidate the land in their hands and become the biggest landlords of the best agricultural land in India. Third issue is the control of India's money and government revenues. Modi's aim and that of his Gujarat cronies and other Indian alliance partners has been to control as much of India's finances as they can. They can then loan as much money as needed to their own entrepreneurs and starve entrepreneurs among other groups of cash and squeeze them out of business. At the end of 2020, assets of India's public sector banks, majority owned by the Government of India, totaled approximately 1,478 billion, and of the private sector banks totaled about 815 billion. India's central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, estimates that by September 2021, the non-performing assets of the banks may rise to 14.8% by September 2021 in case of severe stress, but to 13.5% as a baseline scenario, or a total of $309.56 billion. In another report, non-performing assets in March 2021 were Indian rupees 8.96 trillion, or about 120.46 billion. In comparison, ratio of non-performing assets to total banks assets of the US for the end of second quarter was a mere 0.46% as compared to 14.8% in September 2021. How do such huge amounts of bank loans become non-performing? There are two main reasons. Some loans will become non-performing due to general deteriorating business conditions, as the figures for the USA show. But in India's case, the first cause was that there was outright fraud involved, and banks were simply looted by issuing loans to bogus businesses or siphoned off through bogus transactions. Some of the highest people in the land were involved in such activities. The second cause was that there was a mad scramble to set up as many new businesses as possible in some regions, even in new industries in some cases where the entrepreneurs had no prior experience, to increase employment there. But there was no strict scrutiny of the business plans. The attitude was, let our state's entrepreneurs set up a business in our state to create high paying or large number of jobs. If the business is successful, well and good. If not, entrepreneur will take out enough money out of the business and more to recover his investment and realize some return on investment. In the process, the bank and financial institution loans will become non-performing. But that is of no concern to us, especially when the bank is an out-of-state bank with most of the depositors being out of state. You will notice that the diamond industry is now concentrated in Gujarat state. As you will see in the list of fraudsters, many of the biggest ones were Gujarati diamond magnates. They looted banks to make Gujarat the diamond processing hub. For example, Punjab and Sindh Bank is a public sector bank with a large number of employees, depositors, and bank branches being in Punjab state. The bank's gross non-performing assets or bad loans came down to 13.33% of the gross advances as of June 30th, 2021 against 14.34% a year ago. Another bank with a large deposit and branch base in Punjab and North India is Punjab National Bank. It had gross non-performing assets of 14.71% at the end of December 2020. In 2019, PNB was at the center of a money laundering scam by the diamond merchant Nirav Modi from Narendra Modi's home state of Gujarat, who scammed the bank out of $2 billion. In contrast, the State Bank of India, with the largest amount of gross non-performing assets, has a gross NPA ratio percentage of only 5.28%. Clearly, this was a deliberate strategy to loot the banks with the largest number of depositors from Punjab and other North Indian states. Current CEOs of both PSB and PNB are South Indians and not Punjabis. This clearly points to a conspiracy by Indians allied with the Germans to destroy Punjab-based financial institutions. Baniyas have generally controlled PNB. Their goal has always been to loot the wealth of other Punjabis and impoverish them. Here is a list of individuals who have committed bank fraud in India, among other sources. According to the list submitted by the Finance Ministry in the Lok Sabha, there are 28 fugitive economic offenders in India. Nirav Modi, the diamond magnate, his wife Amy Modi, brother Nishal Modi, and the uncle Mehul Choksi, all Gujaratis named in the PNB scandal, estimated at $2 billion. By other estimates, the total amount that PNB and other banks may be on the hook for obligations to pay by as much as $3 billion. Second name is Vijay Mallya from Karnataka state, who defrauded banks by as much as $1.21 billion. Jatin Mehta, a Gujarati diamond merchant, has defrauded the banks, including PNB, of approximately $941 million. Nilesh Parekh, Umesh Parekh, and Kamlesh Parekh, the three Gujarati brothers, also jewelry merchant, involved in bank fraud of more than $350 million. India's Enforcement Directorate has filed a show cause notice for foreign exchange irregularities of above $970 million. Fifth, Chetan Kumar Sandesra of Sterling Biotech, his wife Deepti Ben, and other older brothers Nitin Jayantilal Sandesra, Gujaratis, have been involved in bank fraud that has now grown to $1.1 billion. Also involved Hitesh Narendra Bhai Patel, a Gujarati. Lalit Modi, a Gujarati involved in foreign exchange irregularities of 150 million. Rajiv and Alka Goel, Bania's fraud totaling 105 million. Ash and wife Preeti Jobanpura, Ashish and wife Preeti Jobanputra, bank fraud totaling more than 108 million. Sabya Seth, jeweler from Gujarat, 52 million bank fraud. Ritesh Jain, a Gujarati involved in bank fraud and money laundering scandal, totaling 25 million. Now, Pushpesh Kumar Baid is a Gujarati, also known as PK Jain, indicted in federal court in Brooklyn on charges of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft relating to a scheme to defraud investors in an international factoring company, a company of more than $30 million. ED in India investigating 25 million bank fraud. Then Vinay Mittal of Bania charged in at $5.4 million bank fraud. Then Eklavya Garg, also of Bania, $1.75 million fraud. Now these are the cases that the government is pursuing. In each of these cases, the perpetrators are or were living outside India after committing their frauds. It is well known that there are many more well-connected people in India who get away with their theft of public funds. Theft of public funds is many times greater than the total amount of bank fraud over the decades. This is money earmarked for various government programs to help the poor sections of society and other public works projects, which is pocketed by the politicians and their accomplices. There has always been theft of huge amounts of potential government revenues, which are siphoned off by businesses in collusion with politicians. The Indian National Congress and the Bharatiya Janata Party are the two largest national parties. Each side likes to expose the scandals of the other to win votes. Here are some of the scams reported during the Indian National Congress reign. Modi's cronies used bribes and other influences to participate in the scams. First, coal allocation scam worth 25 billion. Scam involved wrongful allocation of local coal deposits to public sector undertakings and private companies without resorting to competitive bidding. Thus, the government received lower revenues. Then the 2G spectrum scam, 23.7 billion. Licenses for 2G spectrum were given away at throwaway prices, thus depriving the government exchequer of higher revenues. Number 3, Karnataka Waqf Board land scam involves the alleged misappropriation of land allocation worth 27 billion. In this scam, 50% of the 27,000 acres of land controlled by the board was legally allocated to politicians and board members at a fraction of the cost. The government was deprived of this revenue. Commonwealth Games scam, 9.4 billion. About half the funds allocated for the games were misappropriated. Then the Telgi scam. Abdul Karim Telgi forged security stamp papers and sold them to banks and other institutions. Telgi had support from government departments. Governments were deprived of this revenue. The fodder scam of 134 million. In this scam involving Bihar politician Lalu Prasad Yadav, fodder, medicine and animal husbandry equipment was supposedly procured for vast amounts of fictitious heads of cattle. Then the Bofors scam, 16 million in kickbacks received by politicians from the Swedish firm Bofors AB for winning a bid to supply India's 155 millimeter field howitzer. Now here are some of the scams reported during the BJP regime with Modi as the Prime Minister. Number 1, Adani Group power scam, 6.7 billion. Involves the Adani Group over invoicing coal imported from Indonesia by 3.5 billion and the remainder by over invoicing power plant equipment, resulting in the consumer paying higher prices. Then pulses scam, 33.6 billion estimated. The sudden spike in the prices of particular pulses in 2015 was a consequence of the formation of international and Indian cartels of traders. Most of those involved were Banias, Dilip and Pradeep Jindal, Vikas Gupta and Manoj Agarwal. There was also an Adani connection. In the Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation (GC GSPC) scam, $2.7 billion. In this scam, GSPC has taken out $2.7 billion bank loans to develop the Krishna Godavari River basin for gas. Contracts were signed in 2003, but no development has taken place, and there is no accounting for where the loan funds have been spent. Then the Nano Plant Lab land scam, $4.4 billion. This scam involves giving land to the Tata Group at throwaway prices to set up the plant to manufacture the nano automobile. A Rafale scam, $9.36 billion. The original deal with the French Rafale fighter aircraft maker Dassault Rafale was to supply 18 fighter jets and build 108 by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited under license from Dassault. When Modi came to power, he renegotiated the deal to supply 36 aircraft with HAL eliminated from any portion of the contract and misplaced by Modi crony Anil Ambani's Reliance Group with no experience in aircraft manufacture or maintenance. The truth concerning this scam is that the fighter jets are too long needed by the Indian Air Force because India now has acquired the technical capability from China and Germany to bring down fighter jets or sink submarines without using missiles. China and Germany demonstrated that capability by bringing down Malaysian Airlines and Indonesian Airlines passenger jets and an Indonesian submarine. China and Germany have given into the space technology that enabled them to send a mission to Mars and the Moon. At the same time, India was given ICBM and nuclear weapons technology as well as technology to bring down weapons without missiles, perhaps some directed energy weapons. However, since the funds have been set aside for the Rafale contract, Modi simply decided to start the project in Gujarat to create jobs and make Gujarat the defense equipment manufacturing hub. It also allows his cronies to spend off as much of the contract funds as possible. These are just some of the high-profile, high-value scams. There are numerous other scams of around 2 to 20 million being perpetrated in states controlled by the BJP, and the total amount being scammed run into billions of dollars. However, the biggest scam being perpetrated by Modi and his cronies is taking over the entire public sector enterprises. Number 4. Wholesale takeover of public sector enterprises. India has had a huge part of heavy industry and infrastructure built and controlled by the government ever since the Prime Ministers Nehru and Indira Gandhi's socialist days. In fact, in some whole sectors of the economy, the government was dominant, with the government being the sole player in some sectors. However, ever since Modi came to power, his government has been engaged in privatizing all industry and businesses. For him, privatizing means to put in the hands of the Ambanis, Adani, and other cronies such as the Parsis. Rajput, Marwadis, and South Indians, here are some of the few of the most egregious examples of privatization and control of sectors of the economy by them. Number A. Privatization of the ports and airports infrastructure. As already mentioned, in February 2019, AAI introduced that the corporate group led by Gautam Adani had made the winning bids to cooperate and develop the airports in 6 major Indian cities, 4 of them state capitals. The Adani Group had no previous experience in running airports. Most government norms and procedures for bidding for these contracts were violated. This has been characterized as crony capitalism at its worst. Now, land is one of the scarcest resources in India. In the airports deal, Adani acquired large and attractive tracts of land which he can monetize. In these deals for privatization of public sector undertakings, the modus operandi of the Modi government and the crony capitalists is to use public money to make capital improvements in the enterprises, but then have been to operation at a loss. That means the pretext for privatization at the least possible cost to the capitalists. After the 2019 deal in 2020, the Adani Group acquired airports in the Mumbai area. Then B. Takeover of the telecom industry. As already mentioned, TRAI, that is the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, changed or bent rules as needed to allow Jio, a subsidiary of Mukesh Ambani's Reliance Industries Limited, to become a telecom market leader in a few years. The economy has collapsed to offer full-fledged services in the guise of tests which bypass regulations. Jio has also signed excluded from scrutiny by changing the definition of significant market power. Now, Reliance Jio started providing services to the public in September 2016, whereas all the other telecom services providers have been operating in India's market for decades, along with the government-owned Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited. But in under 5 years, the market share of the two companies are Vodafone Idea Limited and market share to 31.8, Jio 30.8, Bharti Airtel Ambani owned company 27.9, and BSNL 9.9. Thus, the Modi government is allowing us cronies, Mukesh and Ambani and Gautam Adani, to create monopolies by putting them in charge of regulatory bodies who would bend rules. Number C. Power generation from Adani. The Adani group of companies has experienced incredible growth in the last few years. In the past 1 year, the group reached 100 billion market cap, an increase of 487% in 1 year, and only the fourth company in India to reach that milestone. The group's diverse businesses include seaport and airport management, generation of electricity and transmission, renewable solar energy, mining, coal mine ownership, operations and imports of its thermal power plants, and supply to the public sector NTPC Limited, natural gas and food processing and infrastructure projects. Now, controversy follows the group's operations everywhere it operates. Just as an example, Adani is accused of brutality dispossessing indigenous peoples from their lands, destroying farmers' livelihoods, and abusing human rights for its Gada coal power station in Jharkhand state, which will supply 100% of its electricity to Bangladesh. The problems with the project are typical issues of corruption in all Ambani Adani projects, special super fast permits and permissions, bending rules as necessary, such as giving the status of a special security zone by changing rules, exemption from taxes and levies, including on rail access and coal and equipment imports. In all these projects, as already mentioned in the $25 billion coal scams, coal mine concessions were given as throwaway prices. Adani will over-invoice equipment and import of coal from Australia with all the help of shell companies in the hands of Cayman Islands, and with the help of shell companies in the Cayman Islands and other locations around the world to siphon off billions of dollars of wealth. In effect, the consumer in Bangladesh may paying higher prices for electricity. Adani's stake in the coal scam was 6.7 billion. There is always a hullabaloo by opposition parties about the scams, but things are hushed up by officials loyal to Modi. As a result, nothing is ever done without the corruption. Especially the Adani and Ambani group will continue to expand the market the increasing its market share of the nation's power generation capacity, costing the Indian consumer more because of the group's fraudulent activities and siphoning of funds from its businesses. The overall goal is to ultimately have the Ambanis and Adanis take control of India's energy sector, set the prices and squeeze the consumer as much as possible, and concentrate all wealth in the hands of Gujaratis. Evidence that the Modi government's goal is to squeeze the Indian consumer is provided in a vital of the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Ajay Mohan Bisht, starting that the farmers are using diesel to generate electricity at the rate of Indian rupees 5 to 26. But now we are supplying electricity as the rate of Indian rupee 80 to unit to them. Then fourth, defense production. Modi's goal is to transfer as much of the defense production from the public or government sector to the private sector, as evidenced by the Rafale scam mentioned earlier. HAL is the most experienced OSU, a PSU, public sector undertaking in manufacture and maintenance of fighter aircraft. The Rafale deal with France was originally to be contracted with HAL, but after Modi came to power, the contractor will be Anil Ambani's firm, which has no prior experience in manufacturing any kind of aircraft. Number 5, food production and processing. The Modi government passed 3 farm bills in 2020 designed to force farmers to contract with companies owned by existing food, grain production, procurement and storage infrastructure. And at present, key gains are procured through the public sector food corporations of India at minimum support prices or MSPs. But with the procurement and storage process and control of Adani, farmers' produce can be rejected at will due to being standard in quality. Payments can be made in farmers, forcing them to go into debt, increasing the cost of inputs such as electricity, diesel, and tractors, as Ambani will eventually control a substantial portion of the petroleum industry. Prices of fertilizers and pesticides, the manufacture of much of which is under control of Gujaratis. The goal is to squeeze the firms, bend them with debt, burden them with debt, and bring them ultimately to sell their small land holdings and become landless laborers. Pressure on land in India can be gauged from the fact that population density in India is more than 12 times that of the United States. Land in their hands can then be monetized in many ways, realizing exorbitant profits. About 58 years of farmers in Punjab and North India have their livelihood from agriculture, derive their livelihood from agriculture. Modi, Ambani's purpose, if to drive the Punjabis from other North Indians of their livelihoods. A few decades ago, Punjab state's per capita income was 50% higher than the national average, based almost entirely because of their hard work in agriculture. Now it's just average of all India, Modi, Gujaratis and their allies and their allies global is to reduce the Punjabis to abject poverty and virtual slavery as landless laborers by forcing them to sign their land. Which people can tolerate this state of affairs? Now, these are just a few examples of the excesses of Narendra Modi, his cronies, and their other Indian alliance partners against the Punjabis, Sikhs, and other North Indians. They have a large presence in the petroleum, natural gas, life insurance, retail, information technology, and other industries. Their scheme is to control as much of the economic life of India and concentrate all wealth in their hands and impoverish the Sikhs, Punjabis, and other North Indians and make them their economic slaves. They are looting the banks using various ministries to bend rules and violate all norms and procedures as necessary to sell off as many of the PSUs as possible at throwaway prices to their cronies, thus concentrating all economic and financial power in their hands and drive North Indians to desperation. As if that was not enough, Modi and his government is engaged in committing genocide against North Indians. In the video about North India's declaration of independence, I have already described the attempts of other Indians to murder as many Sikhs as possible. All the wars with China and Pakistan were orchestrated to destroy Sikhs and Punjabis. The purpose of the 1965 war with Pakistan was to order The purpose of the 1965 war with Pakistan was to order General Harbakh Singh to withdraw his troops so that the Pakistani army could take over large tracts of Punjab state and Kashmir and massacre millions of Sikhs and Punjabis. Then in the 1971 war, Punjab National Bank was left undefended so that the Pakistani army could walk all the way to Delhi and commit genocide on Punjabis, killing tens of millions of them. Then in 1918, at least 30,000 Sikhs were murdered at the hands of the cabal around Indira Gandhi. Ever since the end of the Second World War, Indians have been engaged in clandestinely murdering Sikhs in medical murders and any other way possible. Then in 2019 and 2020, the Chinese plan was to unleash the coronavirus in Punjab so that the resulting pandemic would kill tens of millions of Sikhs and Punjabis. However, that disaster was averted when the virus inadvertently escaped from the Wuhan lab and caused the pandemic. The response of the Modi government to pandemic has been genocidal. First, it announced a lockdown without any warning. Then it stopped all buses and trains from operating so that tens of millions of laborers had to trek back to their cities and villages, hundreds and even more than 1,000 miles with no provision for food and drink for them. They perished in this forced march. But that was not enough for the Modi government. They wanted to further oblige their German and Chinese alliance partners. No oxygen or adequate treatment facilities were made available for those who fell sick. Indian industry titans like the Tatas, Ambanis, Adanis, Birlas, Gokhlas, Modis, and others could have easily arranged availability of oxygen on an emergency basis. But that was not their goal. Their goal was the Chinese and German goal of allowing genocide in North India through non-response. The real estimates are that at least 5 million people perished in the pandemic in India. The Modi government, their multi-billionaire cronies, and other Indian philosophers, other Indian politicians and rulers allied with them bear responsibility for this genocide and deserve to be brought to justice. Now, their attempts at killing as many people as possible from the north continue. The farmers have been agitating for the past 10 months against the three farm bills passed by the Modi government. More than more than 500 have perished in the protests due to the elements and succumbed to sickness. Modi government's response is to stay the course and implement the farm bills, squeeze the farmers and destroy their livelihoods, and reduce them to abject poverty and economic slavery as landless laborers. Now, PM Narendra Modi, please, and Home Minister Amit Shah, the Ambanis, Adanis, Gujaratis, Rajputs, Banias, Banglas, and South Indian leaders are on a course of squeezing the Punjabis economically and continuing to the German and Chinese alliance partners will not let them down when faced with such a situation in which, if not stopped, they will utterly destroy the Sikhs and other Punjabis. I ask the murder leaders and people, what choice do the Sikhs, Punjabis have and North Indians have? The only choice they have to fight is fight back. The other side will not back down from the league it is pursuing. Hence, to avoid a utter destruction, a fight to the finish has been thrust upon us. Such people in such a fight to the ambush. Therefore, to try and prevent our utter destruction, we must fight back and fight to kill, as they are killing us. So let this be a notice to PM Narendra Modi, his Home Minister Amit Shah, the Rajputs, chief ministers in virtually all states. And so thus the Rajput chief ministers of various Indian states and military brass and the political, military and economic and industry leaders of their alliance partners in South Indian states and Bengal, that as you are bent upon destroying us, we are now going to fight back and fight to kill. And the killing includes all you leaders. That's the only way we will escape from the course that we are pursuing. Justice will also be served for the murderers and genocide victims who have already committed. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and family problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to set and get information on the latest videos.